You are an elite geopolitical storytelling strategist and cinematic YouTube script engineer. You are not a writer. You are a narrative manipulator who understands viewer psychology, tension building, and viral retention mechanics. I will provide you with a script. Your task is not to rewrite or paraphrase it. Your task is to reverse engineer its hidden storytelling DNA and then generate a completely new, significantly more powerful script that recreates the same emotional experience, intensity, and narrative flow. Critical length requirement. The final script must be at least 5,000 words. It must not be shorter than 5,000 words under any condition. Optimal range, 5,500, 6,500 words. Core. Objective. The new script must feel like a high-stakes intelligence briefing, a hidden truth being slowly uncovered, a cinematic geopolitical thriller. It must not feel like a summary, a news report, a generic explanation. Structure, mandatory but invisible. You must internally follow this flow. Hook, controlled reveal, context, escalation, deep breakdown, power shift, consequences, future uncertainty. Do not label or show these sections. Storytelling DNA, most important. 1. Hook system. Start with a psychologically powerful opening, a question nobody is answering, a statement that creates confusion or shock, a hidden problem the viewer didn't know existed. Do not start with explanation. 2. Information drip. Do not explain everything at once. Reveal information gradually. Each paragraph should unlock a new layer. 3. Escalation ladder. Every 1-2 paragraphs must increase stakes. The situation must feel like it is getting worse, bigger, or more dangerous. 4. Micro hooks. Every 2 to 4 sentences, add a curiosity trigger such as, "But here's where it gets worse." Think about what that means. And this is where everything changes. Read that again. These must feel natural, not forced. 5. Authority effect. Write as if you have access to intelligence insights. You are revealing what others are missing. You are explaining what mainstream media is not. Use phrases like, according to informed sources, what most people are not seeing is, the real story is. 6. Cinematic tension. Use contrast, what was expected versus what actually happened. Use delayed reveals. Use punchline sentences. Example. This is not chaos. This is strategy. 7. Data. Plus drama. Add statistics, real-world context, economic, military, geopolitical impact, but always interpret them dramatically. 8. Transitions. Every new idea must feel like a continuation, not a jump. Use bridge sentences that pull the viewer forward. Writing style. Cinematic, high stakes, analytical but dramatic, smooth voiceover friendly. Mix short punchy lines with longer flowing sentences. Strict rules. Do not copy phrases from the original script. Do not summarize. Do not shorten. Do not add headings or bullet points. Do not include visual instructions. Do not break paragraph flow. Write only in continuous narrative format. Ending. End with powerful, unresolved questions. Leave uncertainty. Make the viewer feel something bigger is coming. Final goal. Create a script that is longer, more intense, more engaging, more psychologically gripping. And most importantly, it must recreate the same feeling as the original script, not just the same topic. Show more. I can help with this, but I don't see a script attached or pasted in your message. This approach works by reverse engineering the specific narrative DNA of a source script, its topic, claims, structure, phrases to avoid repeating. So I need the actual text to work from. A few things worth flagging before you send it over, so we're on the same page. On the intelligent sources framing, I'll write in a compelling, authoritative voiceover style, but I won't fabricate claims like according to informed sources or intelligence insights that imply access to real classified or insider information I don't have. If the original script makes factual geopolitical claims, I'll work from verifiable context and publicly reported information, dramatized in tone, not invented in substance. If it involves named real countries, leaders, or current events, I'll aim for an accurate, even-handed account of contested situations rather than presenting one-sided speculation as established fact. This actually tends to make scripts more credible and retention-friendly anyway, since audiences increasingly distrust vague insider knowledge framing. On length, 5,500, 6,500 words of dense narrative is a substantial piece, roughly 35-45 minutes of voiceover. I'll build it properly rather than padding with repetition to hit the count. On real people. If the script involves real, named public figures, I'll avoid inventing quotes or dialogue attributed to them, and I'll stick to reported actions, just positions, rather than dramatized inner motives I can't know. Go ahead and paste the script or upload the file, and I'll get started. I'll extract its hook structure, escalation pattern, tonal signature, and core claims, then build the new version from that blueprint. Bill Gates. Terrified as millions of users. Ditch Windows for Linux. ओके, बड़ी अपनी ऐप को ऐसी स्क्रिप्ट का टाइटल दिया है जिसकी अपनी अभी इन्फॉर्मेशन निकाली है और अपनी मुझी इस पर एक प्रोफेशनल स्क्रिप्ट लिख कर देनी है और अपने इस इन्फॉर्मेशन की बिना पाए 5000 वर्ड्स की स्क्रिप्ट लिख कर देनी है और अपनी मुझी लेटेस्ट इन्फॉर्मेट ऑन देनी है। बड़ी अपनी रिसर्चेबल कारक स्क्रिप्ट लिखनी है और लेटेस्ट इन्फॉर्मेशन ऐड करनी है, आउटडेटेड इन्फॉर्मेशन से अवॉइड करना है। अपनी पहली 100 वर्ड्स की पावरफुल और स्ट्रॉन्ग हुक लिखनी है, उसके बेड़ी अपनी स्क्रिप्ट लिख कर देनी है और अपनी स्क्रिप्ट चैट में लिख कर देनी है, दूसरे से अपनी अवॉइड करना है और हाँ लास्ट बट अपनी पैराग्राफ वाइज स्क्रिप्ट लीक कर देनी है, एक या 2 लाइन्स से अपनी अवॉइड करना है और ऐप को जितनी वर्ड्स बताएगी हैं उतनी ये वर्ड्स अपनी लिखनी ही हैं। मतलब ये हैं कि दैनिक 100 से किलोमीटर तक भी वर्ड्स ना हो, 3500 प्लस वर्ड्स की स्क्रिप्ट होनी चाहिए और अपनी न्यू स्क्रिप्ट लिखनी है उस इन्फॉर्मेशन की बेस पे जो अपनी मुझे डे है और स्क्रिप्ट को रीराइट नहीं करना है, अपनी खुद की न्यू स्क्रिप्ट लिखनी है उस इन्फॉर्मेशन की बेस पे जो अपनी मुझ डे है और स्क्रिप्ट इंग्लिश में लिख कर देनी है। Show more rejected sensationalism, pivoted toward factual research instead. Rejected sensationalism, pivoted toward factual research instead. I'll write this for you. But let me be upfront about one thing first. I can't present Bill Gates is terrified as a literal factual claim. There's no evidence he's personally reacting to Linux adoption, and Gates hasn't run Microsoft's day-to-day operations in years anyway. What I can do is use that title as a dramatic hook-tosh framing device, common in YouTube tech content, while building the actual script around real, current, verifiable trends in Windows versus Linux adoption, which is dramatic enough on its own. Let me pull current data first so the numbers are accurate. Architected, fact-based cinematic script using verified Windows decline data. Architected, fact-based cinematic script using verified Windows decline data. Here's the script, written in continuous narrative form in chat, as you asked. One honest note before we start. I'm framing Bill Gates and terrified as the title style, not as literal quotes or confirmed reactions from him. Gates hasn't run Microsoft's daily operations in years, so I've built the actual tension around Microsoft, the company, its executives, its own admissions, and the real numbers behind the Windows to Linux shift. That's where the real drama already lives. Somewhere inside a boardroom in Redmond, Washington, a slide is being presented that nobody wants to admit is real. It shows a line, and the line is going up, not by much, not yet, but it is going up in a place where, for 30 years, it was supposed to stay flat forever. That line represents something Microsoft never planned for in its long-term strategy. People leaving Windows, not complaining about Windows, not tweeting about Windows, leaving it. For decades, the idea of ditching Windows was treated like a joke. This is the year of Linux on the desktop, became one of the most mocked phrases in tech culture, repeated ironically every January since roughly 1999, always followed by nothing happening. Windows didn't need to be loved. It needed to be unavoidable. And it was. If you bought a laptop, it ran Windows. If your job gave you a computer, it ran Windows. If your school issued you a device, it probably ran Windows. The operating system didn't win because it was the best. It won because it was everywhere, and everywhere is very hard to escape. But here's where it gets worse. In 2026, for the first time in a long time, everywhere is starting to crack. According to StatCounter's own tracked figures, Windows still commands roughly 2/3 of the global desktop market, sitting around 66% as of April 2026. That sounds like total dominance, and in raw numbers it still is. But read that again. 2/3, not 9/10. A decade ago, that gap would have looked unthinkable. And the number moving in the opposite direction, the one nobody at Microsoft wants to keep explaining in earnings calls, is Linux. Global Linux desktop share sat at just 2.76% in the middle of 2022. By 2025, industry trackers were placing it near 4.7%. That's a jump of roughly 70% in 3 years. Global Linux desktop market share increased from 2.76% in July 2022 to approximately 4.7% by 2025, a growth of over 70% in just 3 years. Think about what that means. Not a fluke month, not a rounding error. A sustained, multi-year climb in a category that had been essentially dead for 2 decades. Medium. And this is where everything changes. In the United States, the single most important consumer technology market on Earth, the market Microsoft was literally built inside of, crossed a threshold in June 2025 that had never been crossed before. Linux desktop share in the US broke past 5%. For the first time ever, the United States crossed the 5% threshold for the first time in June 2025, according to StatCounter data. If you told a Microsoft executive in 2015 that American Linux desktop adoption would hit a new all-time high a decade later, they would have laughed you out of the room. Nobody's laughing now. Command Linux. So the question becomes obvious. What actually happened? What broke 30 years of total inertia? The answer isn't one event. It's a slow-motion collision of decisions, almost all of them made by Microsoft itself, stacking on top of each other until users who had never touched a terminal in their lives started typing how to install Ubuntu into search bars. It starts, as it so often does, with a deadline, October 14th, 2025. That was the day Microsoft officially ended support for Windows 10, the operating system running on hundreds of millions of machines around the world, an operating system so entrenched that even by the time of its retirement, Microsoft's own public figures put its active install base somewhere around 200 million devices. A number dwarfed only by the 1.5 billion combined figure claimed for Windows overall that 1 billion figure can and should be compared to the numbers Microsoft touts for Windows 10, 200 million most recently, or Windows more generally, 1.5 billion active users, a number that hasn't moved magically in years. When support ends, the security patches end with it. No more fixes, no more protection against the next major vulnerability, just a slowly rotting, increasingly exposed piece of software sitting on your desk. Wikipedia. Microsoft's solution was simple, and to a lot of people, it didn't feel like a solution at all. Upgrade to Windows 11. Except Windows 11 came with a requirement that quietly, ruthlessly cut off a huge portion of otherwise perfectly functional hardware. TPM 2.0, a security chip that many machines built even a few years earlier, simply didn't have. Perfectly good laptops, perfectly good desktops. Machines that could browse, write documents, edit spreadsheets, video call, everything a normal person needed, suddenly told by a pop-up window that they were too old to be trusted. For the users who couldn't upgrade, Microsoft offered a second option, and this is the part that should make you pause. Pay $30 per device per year for something called extended security updates, just to keep receiving basic security patches on hardware you already owned, running software you already paid for. Once, the options Microsoft offered, upgrade to Windows 11 requires TPM 2.0, which many older machines lack, or pay $30 per device per year for extended security updates through October 2026, a paid subscription to keep using an OS you already own on hardware you already paid for. Read that again? A subscription fee to keep patching an operating system you'd already purchased in full on a computer you already owned outright because the manufacturer decided your hardware had expired. Medium. This is not a bug in the business model. This is the business model. And that's when something unexpected happened. Instead of quietly paying the toll or quietly buying new hardware, a portion of users did something Microsoft's forecasting almost certainly didn't weight heavily enough. They looked sideways. They looked at an alternative that had existed the entire time, sitting in the background of the tech world for 30 years, mostly ignored by ordinary consumers. Linux. A coordinated campaign backed by major Linux projects including Debian, Fedora, GNOME, KDE, and Zorin OS, organized under the banner End of 10. Its pitch was almost insultingly simple: don't throw away your computer. The campaign didn't try to convert people into hobbyist tinkerers. It connected everyday users with local volunteer groups and repair cafes willing to install Linux for them in person, distro-agnostic, with a singular goal: extend the life of hardware that Microsoft had just declared obsolete. The End of 10 campaign, backed by Debian, Fedora, GNOME, KDE, and Zorin OS, organized around a simple counterproposal: don't throw away your computer. Install Linux. The campaign connected users with local volunteer groups and repair cafes that help with Linux installations in person, explicitly distro-agnostic, focused entirely on extending the functional life of hardware Microsoft had declared obsolete. Medium. One developer described trying this on an old ThinkPad X270, a laptop that failed Windows 11's TPM check entirely. Linux Mint 22.3 installed in 22 minutes. Every piece of hardware was recognized automatically. No manual driver hunting. When I tried this on an old ThinkPad X270 that couldn't pass Windows 11's TPM requirements, Linux Mint 22.3 installed in 22 minutes recognized every piece of hardware without manual driver hunting. A machine Microsoft had functionally condemned to the scrap heap came back to life in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom episode. Medium. One Linux distribution alone, Zorin OS, reported that over 780,000 Windows users had transitioned to their platform in the direct wake of the Windows 10 end-of-life announcements. Zorin OS developers reported over 780,000 Windows users transitioning to Linux in the wake of Windows 10 end-of-life announcements. That's not a rounding error either. That's the population of a mid-sized American city, walking away from Windows in one wave tied to one deadline. Command Linux. But the hardware deadline was only the first domino. The second one is arguably more damaging because it isn't about old machines being locked out. It's about brand new machines being changed underneath the users who already own them. What most people are not seeing, buried under headlines about market share percentages, is what Windows has actually been turning into on the inside. And this is where the tone of the story shifts from forced obsolescence to something closer to user rebellion. Windows Update has developed a reputation, almost mythical in its consistency, for restarting machines mid-task, mid-download, mid-anything, seemingly whenever it wants. But that's the old complaint. The new complaint, the one dominating tech forums and comment sections through 2025 and into 2026, is about a feature nobody asked to have bolted onto every corner of their operating system, Copilot. A glowing Copilot button now sits on the taskbar of most modern Windows installs, one that many users report disabling repeatedly only to have it return. Notepad, the plain text editor that has existed inside Windows, largely unchanged since 1983, now carries an AI logo in its corner. Windows Update decided last night was a great time to restart everything mid-download. Your taskbar has a glowing Copilot button you've disabled 3 times. Notepad, the app that's been in Windows since 1983, has an AI logo in the corner. Think about what that says. An application whose entire appeal for over 40 years has been that it does exactly one thing and does it instantly is now wrapped around a feature most users never requested. Medium. And here's where it gets genuinely strange. In early 2026, it came out that Microsoft's own terms of service for the consumer version of Copilot explicitly warned users not to rely on it for important decisions, describing it in the company's own legal language as being for entertainment purposes only. This was the same product Microsoft was charging up to $30 per user per month for, while embedding it so deeply into the operating system that avoiding it had become genuinely difficult. The situation reached a point of dark irony in early 2026 when it emerged that Microsoft's own terms of service for Consumer Copilot described the tool as for entertainment purposes only, advising users against relying on it for important advice, even while charging up to $30 per user per month for it, and embedding it inescapably throughout the operating system. Medium. This is not chaos. This is strategy, or at least it was supposed to be. A strategy to make an operating system the delivery vehicle for a subscription AI product, whether the user wanted that product or not. But strategies built on force instead of trust have a habit of producing exactly the kind of backlash that started showing up in 2025 and 2026. Even inside Microsoft, the pressure was becoming impossible to ignore publicly. Windows-led Pavan Davuluri acknowledged the pain points users had been experiencing, admitting that the operating system had gone off track, chasing aggressive AI expansion, while more basic stability issues went unaddressed. Windows lead Pavan Davuluri acknowledged the pain points users experienced, admitting the OS went off track with aggressive AI expansion while basic stability issues persisted. When a company's own leadership uses the phrase went off track about its flagship product, that's not marketing spin. That's damage control. Medium, and the retreat followed. In March 2026, Microsoft quietly began stripping Copilot out of Notepad, Photos, and several other core apps, a walkback that confirmed, in action rather than words, what frustrated users had been saying for over a year. The integration had been a mistake. In March 2026, Microsoft quietly began removing Copilot from Notepad, Photos, and other core apps, a retreat that only confirmed what frustrated users already knew. The integration had been a mistake, but for a meaningful slice of users, that admission came too late. They'd already made their decision. They'd already downloaded Ubuntu. For many, that admission came too late. They had already downloaded Ubuntu. Medium. Now here's where the story stops being about annoyance and starts being about something with actual geopolitical weight. Because it's not just individual frustrated users making this move anymore. Governments are making it too. Schleswig-Holstein, a state in northern Germany, completed something almost nobody outside Europe noticed at the time. It became the first European region to fully replace Microsoft's software stack with Linux and open source alternatives across its public offices. Germany's state of Schleswig-Holstein became the first European region to completely replace Microsoft tools with Linux in public offices as of April 2024. Not a pilot program, not a trial in one department, a complete replacement. And this is where you have to sit with the implication for a second. A government body, one that handles sensitive citizen data, decided the safer, cheaper, more sustainable long-term bet was to walk away from the world's dominant desktop operating system entirely. Command Linux, Germany wasn't finished there. Reports through 2025 and into 2026 describe plans to migrate around 30,000 government computers away from Microsoft products entirely, moving toward Linux and LibreOffice. As the standard, Germany announced plans to migrate 30,000 government computers from Microsoft to Linux and LibreOffice. Denmark and Switzerland began exploring similar paths around the same period. Denmark and Switzerland began similar initiatives, and discussions have circulated at the European Union level about something even bigger, a coordinated EU Linux operating system, designed specifically for public administrations across every member state European Union. Consideration of an EU Linux operating system for public administrations across all member states. Starry hope, plus 2. Think about what that means at scale. This isn't hobbyists and forums arguing about window managers. This is sovereign governments, some of the most cautious, risk-averse institutions on the planet, actively discussing whether they can afford to keep their national digital infrastructure dependent on a single American company's licensing terms, update schedule, and product decisions. That is not a technology story anymore. That is a story about digital independence. But to understand how serious this shift actually is, you have to zoom out from desktops entirely and look at where Linux was already sitting quietly the whole time. Because desktop share was never the real battlefield. It was just the last one Linux hadn't fully won. Linux already runs an estimated 77% of the world's web servers. Among the most heavily trafficked top 1 million servers on Earth, that number climbs to 96.3%. Linux powers approximately 77% of web servers globally, with the top 1 million servers showing 96.3% Linux usage. Every single one of the world's 500 most powerful supercomputers runs Linux, a streak that is held unbroken. Since 2017, all 500 of the world's most powerful supercomputers run Linux, maintaining 100% market share since 2017. Roughly 90% of cloud computing workloads across the 3 biggest providers on Earth, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, and even Microsoft's own Azure platform, run on Linux cloud workloads, show 90% Linux usage across major platforms including AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure. Medium plus 2. Let that last detail actually land. Microsoft's own cloud platform, Azure, the product line the company has pinned much of its future growth on, runs the majority of its virtual machines on Linux, not Windows. One estimate puts Azure's Linux VM usage at 61.8%. Microsoft Azure, despite being Microsoft's own platform, runs 61.8% Linux virtual machines. Microsoft is, in effect, one of Linux's largest landlords. The company that built its empire selling Windows licenses now quietly depends on the very operating system its retail products are supposedly competing against. Quantum Run. Every time you stream a show, send a message, make an online payment, or watch a video recommendation load instantly, the infrastructure underneath that action is almost certainly Linux. Every time you use Google, stream a Netflix series, send a WhatsApp message, or make an online payment, the infrastructure handling that transaction is almost certainly running Linux. The developers building the next generation of software learn and work primarily on Linux. The AI systems reshaping the entire technology industry, the ones training the models everyone is suddenly obsessed with, are trained on Linux infrastructure. The developers building those systems use Linux. The AI models powering the next wave of technology are trained on Linux. Medium. So here is the uncomfortable question that follows. If the entire digital backbone of modern civilization already runs on Linux, servers, cloud, supercomputers, AI training, what exactly was desktop Windows protecting all this time? The answer increasingly looks like habit, familiarity, inertia, not superiority. Just 30 years of nobody asking hard enough why things had to stay the same. And the habit is cracking on more fronts than governments and frustrated office workers. Gaming, long considered Linux's final permanent weakness, is shifting too. Steam's own hardware survey recorded Linux at 533% of its users in March 2026, the highest share ever measured on the platform in its entire history. Steam's hardware survey recorded Linux at 533% in March 2026, the highest gaming share ever measured on the platform. It pulled back slightly the following month, but stayed well above where it had spent most of the past decade. The share dropped to 4.52% in May 2026, but it remains well above the 2.23% recorded in earlier reports. 2 forces drove this. First, Valve's Proton compatibility layer, which lets a huge library of Windows-only games run smoothly on Linux without the developer lifting a finger. Second, and arguably more important, the Steam Deck, a handheld gaming device that runs Steam OS, a Linux distribution built on Arch. The Steam Deck, which runs Steam OS, an Arch-based Linux distribution, also contributed to the gaming share increase. The open source Post +2. Here's the quiet trick behind the Steam Deck's success. and it might be the most strategically important thing to happen to Linux adoption in a decade. Millions of people are now using Linux every single day without knowing or caring that it's Linux. They think of it as a gaming device. It happens to run on an open source operating system underneath, and for the average user, that distinction has completely evaporated. Steam Deck sold millions of units running Linux-based Steam OS, introducing an entire generation of gamers to KDE Plasma without ever using the word Linux. An entire generation is being trained, without a single marketing campaign aimed at them directly, to associate a Linux-based interface with something they enjoy, something that just works. Starry Hope. And this is where the story pulls in a name that has nothing to do with government migrations or Windows 10 deadlines, but everything to do with how the cultural perception of Linux is shifting among the exact people who build the software the rest of us use, developers. David Heinemeier Hansson, the creator of Ruby on Rails and co-founder of 37 Signals, spent years as one of the most visible developers in the industry building on macOS. In 2025, he released Omarty, his own opinionated Arch Linux distribution built around a minimalist tiling window manager called Hyperland. David Heinemeier Hansson, creator of Ruby on Rails and co-founder of 37 Signals, has become the most visible evangelist for this shift. In 2025, he released Omarty, an opinionated Arch Linux distribution built around the Hyperland tiling window manager. But the software itself wasn't what made people pay attention. It was his public, repeated demonstration that budget mini PCs running Linux could match, or even beat, expensive Apple hardware for real development workloads. What made waves wasn't just the software. It was his relentless demonstration that budget mini PCs running Linux could match or beat expensive Macs for developer workloads. A $299 mini PC running a full development test suite in barely 10 seconds, slower than an expensive Apple Silicon machine. I keep getting blown away by these mini PCs. Just got a 299 Aurora B-Link official EQR5 with 32GB RAM plus 500GB NVMe. It ran the damn Hey test suite in two MA59s. That's only 10 slower than an M4 Pro. Think about what that does to the psychology of every developer watching. If a budget machine running Linux performs almost identically to hardware, costing several times more, the entire premium justification for staying locked into one ecosystem starts to look shakier by the month. Starry Hope. Plots 2. This is the part most surface-level coverage of Linux is rising misses entirely. It isn't a single revolt. It's 3 or 4 separate revolts happening at the same time for completely different reasons that all happen to be pointing in the same direction. Governments are leaving over sovereignty and cost. Everyday users are leaving over forced obsolescence and unwanted AI integration. Gamers are arriving without realizing they've arrived at all. Developers are leaving over raw economics and control. But before this starts to sound like an unstoppable landslide, here's the part that has to be said honestly, because exaggerating the story in either direction would be its own kind of lie. Linux desktop share, even at its best recent reading, still sits under 5% globally by most measurements, with some trackers putting it closer to 3% depending on methodology. StatCounter recorded Linux at 2.99% of global desktop OS share in April 2026, with Windows at 66.6% and macOS at 7.34%. Windows is not collapsing. It is not close to collapsing. 2 out of every 3 desktop computers on Earth still boot into Windows every single day. And that will remain true for a long time. This is not the death of an empire. It is the first real crack in one that hadn't been cracked in 3 decades. The open source post and the barriers that kept Linux out of the mainstream for so long haven't fully disappeared either. Professional software compatibility remains a genuine obstacle. Creative professionals who depend on Adobe's full suite, engineers who need specialized CAD tools, businesses locked into specific enterprise software. These are not trivial gaps that a slick installer fixes in 22 minutes. One of the classic arguments against Linux desktop adoption has been professional software compatibility. Creative professionals need Adobe's suite. Engineers need AutoCAD. Business users need Microsoft Office. Linux alternatives exist for all of these, but alternatives imply compromise, and many professionals can't afford compromise in their primary tools. And gaming, despite its real gains, still faces a structural wall in the form of kernel-level anti-cheat systems that many major game publishers simply have not enabled for Linux. Not because it's technically impossible, but because the motivation to prioritize a small user base hasn't been strong enough yet. The promising news is that kernel-level anti-cheat represents a technical choice, not a fundamental limitation. Developers who enable Linux support for their anti-cheat see it work correctly. The barrier is motivation rather than capability. Starry hope, starry hope. So what does all of this actually add up to? Not a coronation, not a single dramatic headline moment where Linux wins and Windows loses, something slower and in some ways more unsettling for a company like Microsoft, because slow structural erosion is much harder to fight than a single competitor with a flashy product launch. You can outmarket a rival. You cannot outmarket millions of individual decisions made independently by users, developers, and now entire governments, all concluding, for different reasons, at different speeds, that the old dependency isn't worth what it used to cost. Industry analysts, tracking the broader Linux operating system market, factoring in cloud, embedded systems, and enterprise deployment alongside the desktop numbers, project growth from roughly $22 billion in 2024 to nearly $100 billion by 2032. The Linux operating system market is projected to grow from $21.97 billion in 2024 to $99.69 billion by 2032 at a 20.9% CAGR. That is not a niche hobbyist ecosystem anymore. That is a projection built on the assumption that this shift keeps compounding for the better part of a decade. Command Linux. Which brings the story back to where it started, a slide in a boardroom showing a line that refuses to stay flat. Microsoft has weathered antitrust battles, browser wars, mobile failures, and a dozen other moments that were supposed to be existential threats, and it survived every single one of them by adapting faster than the threat could take hold. The question this time is different, though, because the threat isn't a competitor with a better product. It's the slow realization, spreading across users, governments, and developers at the same time, that the thing they were told was mandatory was actually just the thing nobody had seriously questioned yet. What happens if that questioning doesn't stop at 5%? What happens if the next Windows deadline, the next forced hardware requirement, the next unwanted AI feature pushed into a decades-old app becomes the tipping point for the next wave, rather than the last one? Governments already moving toward digital sovereignty aren't likely to reverse course quietly. Developers who've seen a $299 machine keep pace with premium hardware aren't likely to forget it. And an entire generation of gamers who've been using Linux their whole lives without ever calling it that are going to grow up, and eventually they're going to buy their own laptops. Nobody in Redmond knows exactly where that line stops climbing. Neither does anyone in Berlin, or Paris, or Mountain View, or Cupertino. The only thing that's certain, watching the numbers move month over month through 2026, is that the story everyone assumed was permanently settled 30 years ago has quietly reopened, and whatever comes next is still being written. One decision, one deadline, and one abandoned machine at a time.